You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com. You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome to the Boss Hog of Liberty podcast on the We Are Libertarians Network. I am your host, Jeremiah Morrell. As always, I'm joined by our co-host, Dakota Davis. Our show is about our lives in rural Indiana. This is a show about folks who are involved in politics, and we promise that our episodes are going to be a fun and easy listen. We interview people who are influencers, elected officials, political experts, and people that we just find interesting. Looking around the room, that felt rushed, but it's because it's the second time we've gone through it. We had the massive audio failure on the online feed. Dakota Davis is here. Kade Koger is here for his second appearance on the show. Welcome, Kade.
Good evening.
And on the other side of the room, we have State Senator Mike Crider. Thank you, Mike, for being here.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So you, let me get this right, you represent District 28
right.
in eastern Indiana. It's Hancock County, portion of Shelby County, and Marion County.
Right.
So, and you've been here since 2012.
Yeah, I was elected in the 12th cycle, and this is my sixth session already. And so it's been a fast-paced experience. It's been great.
So if it weren't for redistricting, you'd be my state senator. You replaced our state senator, and the year you took over was the first one with the new districts, I guess.
Right.
So yeah, very, very exciting. And you are from Henry County originally, right?
From Hancock County.
Hancock County.
Yeah.
Shirley, I guess Shirley.
Grew up in Shirley.
Cover both?
And I lived on the Hancock County side. Main Street divides.
Yeah, that's right.
So it was great growing up because my buddies that lived on the other side of the street, we had a natural rivalry between Eastern Hancock and Knightstown. And so the pickup football games got kind of fun sometimes.
Yeah. If anyone is not familiar with Shirley, Indiana, they have an Octagon House,
right,
and they have Ben's Bar,
right,
and Ben's Bar has the best biscuits and gravy in the state that I have tried.
Right.
When I was a 4-H'er, I organized the celebrity goat milking contest for Henry County as a kid, and Senator Gard came to that,
right.
And she was quoted by the paper. They asked her if she'd ever done anything like that before, and of course nobody had ever done a celebrity goat milking contest before. But she said she did kiss a pig in Shirley once. So
yeah,
the hazards of being a state senator,
right?
Man, celebrity goat milking.
I hope
we never get to that level of celebritydom, because I don't want to milk a goat. Doesn't sound fun.
Well, honestly, what happened is one year we invited a bunch of doctors, local doctors, and Dr. Nancy Griffith was, I think she delivered probably almost every kid born in the 80s and 90s in Henry County. Probably delivered you, Dakota.
I don't know. I don't know who delivered me.
You'll have to check.
I totally forget what they look like.
But she grew up on a dairy farm. So she won, and then we let the returning person come back, and she won for about the next 10 years until we ran out of goats.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was not where this was supposed to go. Right. But you said Shirley, and that's where
mine
went.
Yeah.
So normally what we do is we try to just kind of banter for the first few minutes of the show, which we successfully did with the Senator Gard kissing a pig. But we cover the weekend. Dakota, you had a big birthday.
I did have a birthday. I don't know if it was a big one. Last year was a big one, whenever I turned 21.
Yeah, so this is 22. This is the first time you've ever done this episode not being a 21-year-old.
That's true.
So you're an experienced drinker now?
I guess you could say that. It's been a full year.
And your bride turned 21 this week.
She had the big birthday. Our birthdays are 2 days apart. I was born on January 1st. Audrey was born on January 3rd, but exactly 1 year apart. And then my parents' anniversary is December 31st.
So you have one busy week, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
And a national holiday.
Yeah. It gets pretty crazy around here. We always just go to the Elks.
You just spend all of your money at one time. And you were supposed to come with us, Kade, to my brother's house, Danny, the silver fox of the Boss Hog of Liberty.
Yep.
You were supposed to come over to his place New Year's Eve after you went to Pat McAfee. But you never made it. You just hung out in India all night.
This is how Jeremiah forces friendship. He just makes you feel guilty for not going to the things he invited you to, right, Jer? Is that how it goes?
I wouldn't know anything about that. I just create opportunities for people to have social interaction, and if you choose to participate, normally you want to come back again because it's so damn fun.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. Cade keeps coming back.
Yeah, and that's a lot of fun. Yeah, we went to the show, Pat's show, and then we went to the after party and decided to stay a little longer, so it just went on longer than we planned.
Now, you were worried about your Second Amendment rights going in. How was the security?
I could have made it.
You could have been okay?
Yeah, I could have been okay. They wanted, and it went off of my belt buckle, and I just showed him my belt buckle, and he was like, all right, cool. I didn't get patted or anything.
Went to the Morrell Theater.
And whenever we went to see Garth Brooks, and then whenever Audrey and I went to see Jeff Dunham, the security was tight.
It was very tight, at Bankers Live.
Yeah, they didn't. Mine kept going off. I had steel-toed boots on though, so mine kept the metal detector kept going off. Then I was walking through, and then I was like, "Hey, I have steel-toed boots," like, you know. So then they felt all around my belt, did like the finger thing, and checked inside my boots and made sure nothing was in there. It's like, dang.
Yeah, the other social interaction Dakota and I got to have, my dishwasher, this is not a future wife joke, my dishwasher quit working on Monday, and Sarah picked out a new one for me at Lowe's, and then I called on Dakota. I sold my truck last year, and I wasn't sure I could fit the new box in there, so I called on Dakota, and he helped me out.
Because I bought my new truck whenever you sold your truck.
Yeah.
That's just how it works. Teamwork.
One of us needed to have a truck.
Yeah.
And it was your turn.
Yeah.
So you drove up to Muncie and picked it up for me and helped me carry it in the house, and you didn't stay to watch me install it for 2 hours, but you did enough.
I had a puppy to attend to.
Yeah, me too. You ever tried to install a dishwasher with a puppy right next to you?
No, actually, I've been smart enough to put it in the basement.
I had to. Yeah, after he ate 3 or 4 screws, I had to put them away.
Yeah.
So Dakota and I made the mistake of we made the wonderful life decision of adopting puppies. We got brother dogs down a couple weeks ago, and now we're raising them. He's got a wife in the house, and I'm a single puppy dad 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right. Any New Year resolutions? Did you make one? Is that why you put this in the show notes?
No, not really. I didn't really even make one. I mean, my New Year's resolution, since I was probably turning 20, was to lose weight. Now I lose weight for like the first 4 months of the year, and then I just quit. I'm like, nah, this is stupid. And then the January 1st the next year, I'm like, you know what? I really got to lose that weight again. So it's like every year, 15 pounds goes down in the first like 4 months, and then I'm done.
Yeah.
And then it just accumulates.
At least you're consistent.
Yeah, I mean, consistency is the main thing, right?
I started back in September, and I'm down 40.
Yep.
And still, I'm not making a new resolution. I'm just going to keep trying to keep shaving it off. And Kade, you did the Brett Bittner podcast, which has never seen the light of day.
Yeah.
He moved on us, and I texted him today. He's in the snowpocalypse in Boston.
Wow.
And I said, can you please get his podcast up? You're sitting at home doing nothing. And he promised he was going to try to hotspot today and get it up there. So at some point, we're going to get your story on your journey, because it's been a
it'll
heck
happen
of a deal.
eventually.
You're down.
I'm right at
Massive.
100 pounds now since March.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, it's crazy.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to continue with that and see where 2018 takes me.
That's right.
Maybe I can lose 100 pounds and get down to where I was whenever I was 11.
Yeah.
We're coming after you. What's going to happen is we're just going to start borrowing your shirts, Dakota. We're going to come over on Thursday nights and go through your closet and take your clothes.
Sounds good.
So Mike, you've any New Year's resolutions for you?
Well, actually, mine's kind of connected. I used to run a lot. As an officer, I tried to stay in good shape, and for about 8 years, I supervised our officer training academy, and it's tradition in our school that you do a 10-mile run at the end of that training academy, and so I would keep myself in at least enough shape that I could do the 10-mile run with the new officers, just to kind of show them that the old guys could still get out, right, and get out and get after it. But I developed some lower disc problems a few years ago, and they've kind of settled down now. So I'm going to get out and try to start hoofing it again a little bit. And the benefit of that is, of course, you end up expending some calories, and that gives you some associated weight loss. So
one of our avid listeners, who also happens to be my next door neighbor, which is Zachary Bertram. He is a huge runner, like marathon runner, and he said that in 2017 he logged just under 1,400 miles.
It's just crazy.
Yeah.
You could just run to Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, just go full-fledged Forrest Gump.
One of the officers I work with, I just saw that he's going to do ultra marathons, which are up to 100 miles.
Oh my gosh!
And he did, I think, 6 or 7 full marathons this last year and several halves. And so we were one of the agencies that encouraged fitness, and I think you see a lot of ancillary benefits from that when officers are in good shape.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about your background a little bit. Okay. I guess you worked for the Indiana DNR,
right?
And so that is law enforcement,
right?
I guess people don't always know that. Or your role, you were a conservation officer,
right,
which is a law enforcement position.
Yeah, DNR is really a collection of about 29 different areas of responsibility and protection and preservation of natural resources. And so, some of the more visible things are state parks and reservoirs, and but the enforcement branch for all of those activities are the Indiana conservation officers. And so, as a kid growing up, my only goal for a work career was to be a conservation officer. We had a hunting cabin in Brown County, and one of the guys' brothers of the property where we hunted was a district supervisor, and so I would talk to him about it. And so from the time I was about 10 years old on, I was going to wear a green uniform at some point.
That was the goal.
That was the goal. And so I was really fortunate. I made it my first try, and at age 21, I was hired and spent, 30 years in that career field. Had a wonderful career. I was one of those guys that would just do anything as the agency needed a diver or something. I would say, well, that's something I can do. I'll be a diver, which was really a terrible job because you're essentially going into water you can't see. And
as I say, we don't have crystal clear water in central Indiana.
And you're getting drowning victims is most of what we would do. And so occasionally you get a good, like you're going to go to Lake Michigan and dive charting historic shipwrecks or something.
Yeah.
That was great duty if you could get that.
That would be cool.
But and so I had about 18 years of my career. I was assigned to Hancock County, and if you're a person that likes that kind of work in the outdoors, you don't really want to get promoted and go into the office. And so what happened with me is about the time my sons started getting into middle school and really busy with sports and things like that, my wife said, you might think about one of those office jobs kind of things. And so I applied
for a little closer to home.
Right. I applied for promotion into our headquarters. And I was lucky that I lived in Greenfield, Hancock County, because going downtown was like a 30-mile drive, and it wasn't like moving like you would have to do if you were going to become a supervisor in another district or something. Right. And so I did that. I was promoted in 98. I spent about 8 years at the captain level, which I supervised our education programs and our officer training programs. And then when Governor Daniels came in, I moved to the number 2 slot in the state.
Sorry about that. I went to look at my what's going on here, and I magically got the sound working again.
Right. And so when Governor Daniels came in, I moved to the number 2 slot in our state's lieutenant colonel rank.
Yeah, the entire state, not just your region.
Right. And so I spent 2 years there, and then I was Governor Daniels' appointee. For the last 4 years, I supervised the entire operation, which really put me in this spot where it's kind of the headache seat, where you're fixing personnel problems and you're fighting about budgets. And you remember that time period where we were going through.
It was a lot of correction for the state of Indiana at the time.
A lot of
the Daniels administration.
Budget cuts, and we essentially would have to have conversations like, we're not going to be able to do our officer in-service training the same way. How are we going to accommodate that? And we created this interesting process where we created these 15-minute podcasts that we would send out to the officers to their mobile data terminals, and we'd have a little quiz or something. We would deliver training and things that way. But it was kind of a growing period, but it also put me in that mindset that, okay, I'd reached 30 years and accomplished really everything that I wanted to accomplish in the law enforcement field. And so when Senator Gard called me and said, hey, what are you going to do when you retire? And I said, I'm 51. Why would I retire? And she said, well, because I want to, and I think you're a good choice to be my replacement. And so I thought, well, I've done the law enforcement thing. Let's see what politics are like. At least nobody will be shooting at me, right? So
well,
at least you hope not.
So you really hadn't identified politics. You kind of were sought out by Bev.
Right. I really thought that if politics ever entered my life, it would be to run for county sheriff after my law enforcement DNR career was over. But as I said, I was pretty much over the law enforcement thing at that point. It was a great experience base. It was really a tremendous career, and the interesting experiences, we could talk for a couple days about, interesting things that happened during that 30 years.
Yeah, but so down here on our show notes, we have talking about your educational background.
Mm-hmm.
Is it required for conservation officers to go through the law enforcement academy?
Yes.
It is.
And so it's interesting. The DNR officers, when I hired on, college wasn't required, but we're one of the few agencies that requires at least 60 credit hours completed. So a good number of our officers go through a program at Vincennes University, Conservation Law Enforcement. But you can essentially get 2 years of college credits anywhere. And most one of the things we changed while I was still there was we also accept, in lieu of that, 2 years of prior military.
Okay.
And so you'll notice I didn't go to college, so I got out of high school and got a job driving a truck for Irving Materials and drove a concrete truck and waited till I turned 21. And, as a law enforcement officer, you don't make a huge amount of money. Certainly you didn't in 1980. Yeah. I think my first year, my salary was $8,500.
Wow.
And so, I continued driving a truck for them for about 13 years on my days off. And we worked a lot of odd shifts, and especially during hunting season, you work mostly evening shifts. It seems like there's a lot of deer poaching that goes on and things. And a lot of the complaints come in, it seems like in the middle of the night during that period of time. So essentially, you're working most of the time
right.
during that period.
So I also have the FBI National Academy.
Right. And so
what is that?
And so that's a really prestigious thing to get selected for if you're a law enforcement officer. About 1% of the police officers in the world ever get the opportunity to go. And it's something that you're nominated for by your agency, and then the FBI selects about 250 officers from around the world.
And this is this police and conservation?
Well, it's anybody that's in a law enforcement field, and so DNR officers have full state police powers, and
right.
And then they also have the natural resources powers, and they're deputized as federal agents so that they can enforce the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so, I was selected for that in 2003. Tremendous experience. You're with top shelf police officers from around the world, Uzbekistan, Turkey, Egypt, awesome. And all around, and it's essentially a leadership training program.
Very interesting. So basically, you guys you're fully authorized as Indiana police officers. Right. Plus, then you have a handful of other almost like boxes that are ticked because of some of the things you're expected to enforce.
Yeah, that Migratory Bird Treaty, I have to adhere to a lot of that in my career.
Yeah, you probably do
with killdeer and things and geese.
Right.
If they get into substation equipment, you just there's a hotline that we have to call. They give us the instructions on how to handle it. Usually, it just ends up we just bury it in the field next to the sub.
Yeah, it's less the case now, but when I was actually a more active field officer, we had more active military installations in the state. So Muscatatuck, Atterbury, Jefferson Proving Ground, a lot of those places would have deer hunts each year. And so if you went in there and you violated some law on the installation, it actually was a federal violation also.
Right. I actually hunted at Jefferson Proving Grounds for a youth hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was I didn't kill anything, but
some beautiful areas.
It is. It's really cool.
So would you get involved with the state parks as well then? Like, like being a fisherman or,
right.
I try to go, and walleye is always one of the things I'm interested in, walleye and bass fishing. So I know, like, you've got the stocking programs that the state does. Is that something conservation officers are involved in as well, or is that other?
We would participate as we could. I think, each one of those divisions has their personnel that kind of specialists in those areas. Oftentimes, the equipment that we were issued was very useful for those folks, and so most conservation officers have either an ATV or a snowmobile or some type of off-road vehicle that they use, and a watercraft of all kinds, from airboats to huge lake patrol boats, and kayaks and things that are useful on
the smaller streams.
And so the types of equipment that officers are issued makes it pretty valuable. We tried to support the other divisions every way we possibly could. And, a lot of the state parks, if they have a campground, they can almost become small cities on the weekend. And so you have all the same problems, domestic disputes and neighbors that don't like neighbors in the next campsite and, kids smoking weed everywhere. And, so there's all kinds of things that you kind of tried to keep everything as calm as possible and make sure that the visitors were having a good experience as they visited. So, it's one of those things. While you were also the enforcement branch for DNR, you tried to be a good coworker also and help any way you could.
Yep. Well, the outdoorsman stuff is always. I guess all of us have kind of had an interest in it. Kade is an avid hunter as well, and Dakota is. And Dakota took me squirrel hunting for the first time in Liberty. Yeah. We went out in the woods and walked around and didn't see a squirrel all day. We were on one hunter's morning, but we never saw a squirrel.
We saw a bow hunter that didn't have his orange on, and we freaked him out because it was public property, and he thought that we were the officers sticking up on him.
Right. Well, he didn't take you to Baker Park or someplace like that, so you'd have found a lot of squirrels.
Yeah, we could have.
The next time we go, we're going in Kade's yard.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I'm being overrun. Probably as we speak. So.
Yeah, the next week we went and shot some guns at Kade's house, and we saw 30 or 40 squirrels in your yard. We were at, I guess it's just outside of Mounds SRA, or north of Mounds SRA.
I came home and they were taunting me in the backyard afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. I got into bird hunting when I was a young officer and training bird dogs. And so early years, we had quite a bit of quail around in Hancock and Shelby County. And so we quail hunted quite a bit. I still take a trip at least annually to Wisconsin to grouse hunt and occasionally pheasant hunting. In South Dakota or Iowa or someplace.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I've never bird hunted. Have you?
No, I never have.
Really?
I've got some friends up here that do, and I've got plenty of ground to go do it. I just never been able to.
The dogs are really the cool
beaver
part.
Hunting.
Yeah, we'll have to try that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one of my good customers does quite a bit out in does duck hunting, and Matt Wright, who's from this area as well. He's involved with Ducks Unlimited, who was here at Summit, and now he's up in the Tippecanoe County area. Right. And I know Matt does a lot of that as well.
Right.
So let's pivot a little bit here. Okay. The DNR thing led you into the state senate, and then when we first started having a conversation about having Mike on the show, you were in the race for 6th District Congress. We've had Jonathan Lamb's been on the show. Stephen McKenzie's political director was on. Bill Smythe, and then we had Lane Siekman on, and then Nate Lamar was on when he was exploring.
Sure.
So you looked at and did actively run for the 6th District seat up until, I guess, earlier this month, or I guess earlier in December.
Right.
We had the calendar click over on us, and I wasn't. I'm catching up. So I guess, can you talk to me about the process a little bit?
Sure.
And the work you put in, and then kind of how you made your decision as you did.
Right. So I am probably one of the least political politicians that you've had on the show. As I said, I was kind of attracted into or drawn into the political arena. So I've been a senator that's taken on tough issues and been successful. And so when Congressman Messer announced that he was going to seek the Senate seat or the nomination, several of the county chairmen called me and said, "Hey, have you ever considered running for Congress?" And I was like, "No," and I'm not sure I would do that. And they said, "Well, it's going to be an open seat. Those don't come along very often, and we think you should at least explore it." And so I started talking to consultants, and I knew, depending on the names that got into the race, I'd either be somebody that was very competitive or somebody that had challenges based on my name recognition. And so we entered. Things were going really pretty well. I would say that I felt like I would be the front runner if Greg Pence hadn't gotten into the race. Yep. But when he did, what that did, him having a brother who had been the congressman in that same district, raised the expectations financially quite a bit. And so we got together, we did some polling and got the numbers back. And essentially my team felt like we needed to do at least 4 mailers. Each one of those mailers cost about $150,000 in the congressional district. And we needed to be on TV in the Cincinnati, Dayton, and Indianapolis market.
Three different markets at the same time.
3 different markets, all of which are expensive markets. Yep. And then we needed to really hit the direct targeting, social media aspect. And so
all of a sudden it turns into a $1.5 million campaign just to win a primary.
Right. And so I said, look, first of all, being kind of a political neophyte, I don't have that base of connections that will produce that amount of money. And so it really wasn't a hard decision for me to say, look, this just will not work for me. Right. So it was a great experience. I would say I traveled, I worked very hard at it, traveled the district, and, it literally is nonstop. On a Saturday morning, you would get up and hit a breakfast somewhere, and then a couple parades, and try to be at a lunch somewhere, and then a couple of events in the afternoon and dinner, and you got home late at night. And so
that's been the recurring theme with everybody we've had on, is just how busy it is.
And the size of the district.
And the district,
massively rural.
18 and a half counties, and very rural. It's a beautiful district. I enjoyed it because I would drive down the road and enjoy the scenery. And
absolutely.
And the people in the district are really class people too. A lot of rural communities and people who really are concerned about the direction the country has been taking. And so, we had some great conversations. A couple of the bills I filed this session came out of conversations I had in the district that, if I hadn't been running there, I probably wouldn't have had those conversations. So
you've been able to expand your network significantly with contacts in these places, and more people, I'm sure, know you and feel like you're approachable now to them.
Right.
So once you made that decision, you decided that you were going to, I guess, no matter what, you were going to still be doing this session. You weren't going to be dropping out, or you were still going to serve as the state senator until the election. Right. So we're 2 days into this new session, the short session. I guess, tell us about the process. You guys have a certain number of bills that each of you draft. As a senator, is it 10? Can you go up to 10? Is
10.
A deal?
The House has 5, 5 bill limit, and we have 10. And really, you start that process in early December, really working with legislative services, doing bill drafts and back and forth and what they call PD, a preliminary draft of the language that you're looking at, and you shop that around to the concerned parties and see if you're trying to affect things in the right way. And so I've got 10 bills. I typically, last session I had 19 bills, and I passed 11 of those over to the House, and then the second half I carried 15 House bills. And so that's probably one of the reasons why my name popped up as somebody that might be a potential candidate for Congress.
Yeah, whenever you look at I've been writing these show notes, researching the candidates. I always go to Ballotpedia, and just the amount of committees, the amount of bills. You have been a busy guy since 2012.
And thank God you're retired.
Right. The other thing that's happened to me with the retirement of Senator Hirschman, it opened up several of the key leadership positions. And so I've moved on to Senate Appropriations Committee, which is the committee that, develops the budgets. and also on Rules and Legislative Procedures, which is the committee where bills...
That's where bills die.
They say they go to die, but really, I think most of us try to figure out ways to make them better, or so that they're actually accomplishing what they hope to accomplish. And so both of those, they're really honors to be on those committees. You're in leadership discussions that are at a higher level than you probably would be. And so I guess I would say that for somebody that's in their beginning of their sixth session to already have the committee assignments that I have, I'm very pleased with my legislative career so far also.
And then you're also serving on are you still on the Agriculture Committee?
No, I dropped Ag and Natural Resources in order to go on those other committees. I serve on, I chair Homeland Security Transportation Committee. I'm ranking member on Veterans Affairs in the Military, and then I serve on Health Committee.
Okay. All right. So the Transportation Committee obviously was a big one in the last cycle.
Right.
And I, because of my day job, I'm in the construction industry, so it's something we tracked, and we had the fellow from Americans for Prosperity was on the show a couple months ago, and they were one of the leading critics of that bill.
Yeah. Right. Voicing their opposition the most. And it was Justin Stevens.
Justin Stevens, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. He was a great guy to interview. He had a lot of really fair points, but it was like we had known that they had campaigned hard against it, and then you were also a supporter, and we were like, hey, man, we're going to have both of these sides on the show. Right. I just wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, sure. Right. So I think the thing that probably is the most telling about me is, I'm one of those guys that tries to be straight up with the way I do my legislative career also. I could have taken a pass on that bill, knowing I was running for Congress and knowing I would have gotten hits. And I have gotten hits for carrying that bill. But, I went through the summer study committee where we heard from all the experts, and I looked at the challenges, not just the ones that exist today, but in this session we're going to start talking about autonomous vehicles, and and how those vehicles coming onto our infrastructure grid
That's
are going
something that you haven't had to think about before.
They're going to change the expectations. So typically, if we build a bridge, we're hoping to get a 40-year lifespan out of that bridge. And if you do it right and you do a couple overlays, you can get it to about 40 years. But if we're building a bridge now and we need to have some type of device built into that structure, we need to be having that conversation now. We don't want to go back and tear up a new bridge in order to retrofit it. And so,
as a rebar salesman, I'd be fine with that. But.
Yeah, I get that, but we probably would not necessarily go clear down to the rebar. We would just be chipping up the concrete.
You do another overlay that has no steel in it.
Yep.
And so, by the end of the summer study committee, I was not just convinced that the infrastructure bill was the right thing to do. I really had come to the conclusion that to not do something was really just a dereliction of duty.
Yeah.
We had to act. And so I think we came up with a really, a proposal, that the 10 cents, the thing that the people talk about the most is really just a catch up to, indexing inflation.
Right, and I know Representative Soliday worked on this for a very long time, and I followed his opinions on it as well. And I basically they said, hey, this was never indexed, so you had you basically didn't have a change since the mid '90s. Is that right? So the purchasing power was gone for that same dollar, and at the same time, construction costs would go up, and so we were really in a situation where NDOT was in a challenge of just kind of triaging the worst example, and I think it probably really raised its face when they started repairing the bridge on 65 and it sunk.
Right.
That wasn't necessarily caused by the construction. It was just the bridge was in a challenged, compromised position anyway.
That's exactly right. And, that bridge basically, when they tried to do a widening, they the pier literally didn't have piles that went down. It was more of a flat pier without a competent drill shaft or something else.
They would do in the South where they don't have a frost layer.
Right. Yeah. And so Indiana, of course, we have weather. Yep. And, right now it's actually a blessing because it's stayed frozen for a number of days, cycle. Right? And so then the thaw cycle means that, you have water mains break and you've got to break up the roadways and things like that. And so, it's one of those things that you can understand that there are people who have different opinions about the bill. But in my district, the surveys that I did, it was very popular. And I think the polling we've done since then shows that it's got about a 70% approval rate around the state.
So with the it's going to end up being, I think, $1 billion additional in
about $1.2 billion a year.
Yeah. Is that going to be enough for, say, 70 and 65 to be 3 lanes throughout the state?
That's the other part of this discussion. I don't think it is enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you're starting to hear some discussion around tolling. Whether we will have tolling at some level or not, I'm not sure. I do know that the challenge with the federal government rules, it's really hard. There's only 3 waivers that exist to toll currently existing pavement. And so in order to qualify for tolling allowances, you have to widen and expand the infrastructure system. And so I think that's one of the things that you'll see as a study takes place that the governor's office has done. A lot of people are concerned about the authority that we gave the governor, but we put a stopgap in that authority that the state budget agency has to approve any plan that they come up with. And so, already in my list of bills this year, I've got a couple of bills that try to exempt areas of the state from tolling.
So the Beltway around Indianapolis 465, right, I think, is on that on that list.
Right.
And then does it include other, like 469 or what?
It actually what happens is, and I haven't seen them yet, but what I think will happen again this year, and last year I had those bills where people are trying to put caps on out-of-pocket expenses for local residents, and particularly around Louisville and the northwest part of the state. And so I think those are discussions that we need to have as the system kind of expands and becomes a reality. It's a little bit premature right now, and I think, we're trying to be, Indiana's kind of a conservative state, and I think the Senate's a kind of a conservative body, but we're trying to be really thoughtful about the way we move forward with these discussions to try to make sure that the decisions we make actually gets the taxpayer the best result for the money that we're asking them to take out of their pocket.
And then I guess the local, like you represent Shelby County and Hancock County. They've got, I'm guessing that those counties have 600 to 700 to 800 miles of county road as well. Right. Like Henry County has over 812 miles. Is that right, Kate? Yep, somewhere in there. So the counties have, with that, the authorization that you had the last cycle, that helps them with their issues as well.
Yeah,
right?
I would say tremendously, and I would that's probably the piece that I'm most proud of. My participation was to try to make sure that the locals had enough money to take care of their system also, and some of the things that we've done. And I've been really kind of satisfied with some of the grant money that's been available to see some of the projects actually come into fruition. And so I went north of McCordsville the other day, and I got to flip the switch on a new traffic signal that was out of the Community Crossings grant money. And so those things really have a impact on local units and the people who use the system, I think, are seeing results. I've had a lot of comments from people that say, I've smelled more asphalt this summer than I had for years.
Oh yeah,
and
road
hopefully that's the
around
case.
Here has been
right.
crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about the rest of the state, but it's really picked up this year.
And if you're in
2017,
the construction business and you hire these workers that you hope are going to keep busy for the next several years,
right?
Having that certainty to know that there's another $1.2 billion to follow this year up is really a valuable thing. A lot of the big road contractors have said, for years we just weren't sure what volume of work we're going to have, and so you kind of kept this workforce that was kind of in flux, and you would try to get them to go to other states where there was maybe some activity taking place. And so I think it's a good thing for that side of the business also.
Yep.
Whenever I worked construction, I was an electrician. Mm-hmm. It was always stories about guys that had the privilege of working on what was called the road crews, but just installing streetlights and pulling wire to streetlights, and always talking about how good of a job that was, because it was steady for a while, and they knew what they were going to be doing, and quite frankly, it was easy work. I mean, it's setting street poles, it's a good job. So I think I haven't thought about that whenever talking about this the gas tax and the highway bill, but I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I hadn't thought about that aspect of it before.
Sure.
Yeah, it's very big for the industry to have the predictability, because what happened is we had major moves came along when the toll road was leased 11, 12 years ago, and that infused a certain amount of cash into the industry. And then when that ended, we had a couple of $100 million additions that were put in during the Pence administration. And then there wasn't any certainty, so you didn't know what was coming. And honestly, we can talk about how things should be funded or what they need to be, but we have a certain expectation in government of, when you turn the faucet on, the water needs to come on. When you flush the toilet, it needs to go somewhere, and it doesn't need to go into the Blue River like mine does right now. But the mayor's working on it, and you want the roads to be in decent shape,
right?
And that's one of the reasons I asked about 70 over here. We've got a lot of commuter traffic, so people that come from Henry County and they go into Indianapolis, and I know in the last 20 years as I've grown up, Kade, you probably can speak to it too. The truck traffic is just incredible now on 70, where you get jammed up and then people stack up, and you have you have more accidents because you've got traffic that's not freely flowing.
Then once you start heading south, like we had talked about whenever we went to Nashville, and it was 3 lanes the whole way, it was like, holy cow.
Right. You only have to do that through Kentucky and Tennessee. But I will tell you that we've already been and explored a number of tolling systems, and they're not where you stop at a booth and pay anymore. They're gantry across
open
the
tolling
interstate,
like you have it over the new Louisville bridges.
And so one of the things that's really appealing to that is you can lane control based on peak travel times. And for instance, for one of those semis, if you don't want them to get in the high-speed lane, you can make it too expensive to be in the high-speed lane so that they stay over to the side and let traffic function. So there are a lot of appealing pieces to this, and I know it's a bit controversial, and people say, "Oh, how could you even be having this conversation?" But I think our infrastructure system is such an economic driver, and I mentioned earlier a little bit about this idea of autonomous vehicles, and you're going to start to see platoons of semis where there's one driver in the front semi and other semis that are keying off of that vehicle, and so a lot of the patterns are going to change over the next several years. The question is, and just like in your personal finances, if you have an opportunity, do you have the capital to take advantage of those opportunities? If you don't, you're in a compromised situation. And I think Indiana has put itself, at least in the geographic region that we're in a very competitive situation in this discussion.
During the Daniels administration, the Commerce Connector, like another outer beltway, was on his wish list. Yeah. Is that dead, or is there still hope for that in the future?
I think there's a good bit of discussion about that, and I guess the question is where.
Right. I mean, that would go right through the heart of your district if it came along.
And so, there's obvious the congestion. If you want to see true congestion in Indiana, it's go to Northwest or go around Indianapolis, particularly the east side of Indianapolis.
Yep.
And so the question is where, and the idea was that you would connect 69 to 70, and then 70 to 74, and 74 over to 65 again, and then maybe
back up towards the airport or towards the west side of Indianapolis.
And so, initially, Kade's a farmer. Initially, the farmers were, like prime farmland in central Indiana, and if you talked to farmers, this road was going to be 50 miles wide, and it was going to take out everybody's farms.
That was the critical mistake that the governor made, I think, is he released a map, and the map looked like it was 15 miles wide, and everybody thought it was going to go through their yard.
And so, if you're a farmer and you're moving your equipment, you don't want a road bisecting your farm. I mean, that's not the appealing thing. And so there needs to be, as that discussion happens in the future, a lot more thought about where it might be. And I know some communities, Rushville, when I was there recently talking about Congress things, they were saying, look, we want it to go down 3. We actually are appealing for some of that to help happen, and that would be, for a community like Rushville, that would be such an economic driver.
Right. It's one of the biggest regrets. My folks live in Rush County, and that's one of the biggest regrets that the Rush County people have, is that I-74 missed them.
Right.
That it just does not cross. They don't have an interchange, and it's definitely kept Rushville as a smaller, sleepy town or community rather than Shelbyville.
And so they don't have the Honda plant, or they don't have some other thing that might have located there. And so, infrastructure is without question. It's going to be a major discussion over the next several years, and the issues that move through my committee are really pretty fascinating to think. You've got these young engineers that are coming in. You guys are much, much younger than I am, my kids' age, but they're coming in and saying, really, for what we have ability with technology, we're really on the edge, on the cutting edge of what we can do in the future, and those next advancements are going to be kind of quantum leaps to the next wave of the future. And so, there are a number of things that, of course, autonomous vehicles work off of camera systems, and I already had manufacturers coming in and saying you're going to need different orange barrels that you put along the interstate when you're in a construction zone, for instance, more visibility so the camera recognize that. You're going to need different lane markings, where a NDOT truck just driving down and painting stripes now,
it's going to some sort of a sensor,
right? Yeah, it's going to be a different system, and how do you accommodate all that? And so all that raises prices, I guess.
Yeah, it has to get done, and you have to pay the people that get it done,
right?
And that nobody expects that to be done for free.
Sure.
And I think that. Not to dwell on this topic, but I think Justin's main point being against it was just the amount that actually went towards the road, and the amount that currently goes towards roads he felt wasn't enough.
Well, I pushed on NDOT pretty hard, and their internal data shows about 80% of their budget is going into road projects. And so I think that's an area where I probably disagree with him a bit. That 80% number, if it's accurate, is a pretty good percentage.
Yeah,
actually
it is,
getting
absolutely.
into construction projects. And so, again, for those folks, it's really difficult to design, engineer, implement a road project within a 2-year budget cycle. And oftentimes they would get in the middle of something, so it would create really an inefficient process where they weren't using their money in the most efficient ways.
Right.
In some cases, now they've got this ability to say, okay, we're doing this road this year, or this section of roadway this year, and next year we've got this area ready to go. And it should be a much, much better system.
Oh, cool.
So tell us a little bit about the bills that you're carrying. We talked before the show. I know there's one that's in the press today,
right?
And I guess you have a handful more, and some may be more administrative than others. But you have a bill that's dealing with farm ground,
right? Yeah. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out a way to incentivize farmers to, particularly with corn as the crop. Usually soybeans don't exceed 3 feet in height. And my bill...
Cade's do, but he's got special talents.
Yeah. but my bill tries to encourage farmers with a tax incentive to trim the corn back on those sight windows as you're approaching an intersection. I kind of got that idea because railroads use that same concept at their rail crossings, where they require the landowner to trim the trees back so that there's a field of vision for the train operator and the car as they're approaching the rail crossing. And so we had a really horrible accident this last year, and the farmer feels terrible. The family of the young man that was killed feels terrible. And so hopefully this bill will have, some legs and we'll get it through. But I will tell you that part of that back discussion is, will that bill be valuable as we move into these autonomous vehicles where cameras are identifying hazards and helping the car know whether to yield or stop or whatever. And so will this bill be something that's also useful for that purpose? I think it is.
So has it been assigned to a committee? In my mind, this could go to agriculture, it could go to your roads committee, or it could go somewhere else.
So I think what it'll probably go to is tax and fiscal because it has a taxing nexus.
Okay.
I would prefer it go to my committee because I guarantee it'll get heard.
Right.
But I haven't seen what committee it got assigned to yet, and so my job will be to meet with the chairman of the committee and say, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Can you help us get there? I don't know how many people will take advantage of this process. I think it's something that also involves education, and hopefully Farm Bureau and the other farming advocate groups will kind of get on board. I mean, the family in Hancock County, one of our big farming families, great people. The guy just doesn't see. It's his own corn. He pulls out, and these kids hit him, and
it was a 4-way stop, or
no, they had the right of way, and and he stuck the nose of his piece of equipment out there.
It was a sprayer, wasn't it?
A sprayer, yeah.
And those are hard to see out of anyway with booms.
Right.
When they're folded up, there's a lot of blind spots.
I think he's convinced, and his brother in particular is convinced that if the corn had been trimmed back, that accident would not have happened.
Yeah.
And so you can't say that's the case on every situation, but I think, as policymakers, we try to figure out ways to fix a problem without creating another problem.
So your goal in this is to give an incentive to farmers saying, hey, we're not going to tax, what is it, a certain amount of acreage or a certain?
Well, it'd be a site window that's determined. And so I think, we'll try to use some national standard as to whether it's like 1/8 of an acre or 1/16 of an acre within that site window at the intersection. And we'll try to encourage that farmer to maintain that free of shrubbery or anything that would cause a site impediment at that intersection. And so long as they do that, they would qualify for that.
Yeah, when I read the article on the bill, that it was like it was like an immediate. I could immediately think of a handful of intersections just in our area where we live, where it's just horribly dangerous. And I've always thought that growing up in South Henry County, it's a farming community.
Right.
So if you drive anywhere, you get really used to going on the county roads, so much so that you just hate going on the highways.
Right. Yeah.
And it was always like that. I can remember whenever I was going through high school, that even then thinking how dangerous that was.
Mm-hmm. So, Kade, what's standard practice now for that type of a situation? Is it something that you do, some farmers do anyway? Is it something you would take advantage of or think about?
Yeah, definitely. It's not done on purpose. We're not excessively planting in the ditches on purpose. Most of the times you've got, a 20, 30, 40, 60-foot tool, and you're going 7 miles an hour, and it's just depth perception at that point. So you come around to a corner where there's a road intersection, and we'll do our best to stay away, far enough away to leave areas where you can see around that corner, especially with corn.
Sure.
And we'll leave areas, and then sometimes it comes up, and we got too close. And we'll go out there, and we'll cut the tops off so that people can see over them as they're coming around a corner. And we do as much as we can. We do think about that. We do think about the safety of others, especially traveling along the roads, next to our fields. And
you're just about as likely as anybody to be that car coming through.
Yeah, exactly.
It's your
Yeah. But, and another thing too why I like that idea is on those corners. If we were to leave those corners and square them off, that would also give us a place when we're traveling from field to field to put, heads on machines,
store equipment,
pull into the field. That way, when we're harvesting, so we pull a combine into the field, we'll have somewhere actually in the field to pull a combine, then pull a truck with the head equipment. That way we're not in the roadway blocking people or stopping people from getting on, to where they're going.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good idea.
Sense. Yeah.
One of the interesting statistics I heard is most people that are involved in an accident, it happens very close to their home. Statistically, that's where you spend the most of your time.
Within a mile or so
from your house, you're the most likely to have an accident. And so, this is one of those things that, I'm hopeful. I really like the idea of the bill, and I think that it can go one or two ways. It'll either get, some opposition, and people will try to create confusion. As a legislator, you don't want confusion. You want things to be pretty clear, and you want to be able to explain things. But, obviously different lobbying groups have different opinions about things, and so they'll come in and either try to help you or they'll try to hurt you. And so I'm hoping that this is one that people kind of see that it's just a common sense, a logical a solution to a problem that really is statewide.
So I would imagine one of your challenges potentially could be county government missing out on revenue or trying to administer it, right?
Right.
I mean, I
think the administration part of it is probably the biggest challenge. Oftentimes you've got big farmers, you got absentee landowners, you got people who cash rent, you've got other landowners who have one person's getting the economic benefit of the land and the other person owns the land. And so how do you administer that in a way that's effective? And I think, generally will depend on the farmers to be the conduit that makes the situation happen. And hopefully that works well.
The interesting part of the approach that you have, though, that is you're trying to incentivize. You're not penalizing. You're not saying if you go in this area, we're going to come after you, or we're going to. You're trying to give them an incentive to not do it.
And it's that old saying: you attract more bees with honey than you do with vinegar. And so, I think that's the right approach to at least start the discussion. And we'll pass a bill hopefully, and we'll see whether we have success with it. I think that we'll have success with it. It makes sense to me that people would take advantage of it.
So what other bills are you carrying so far? I know you'll end up with more as we go along. But.
So I've got a full boat of 10 bills. I work a lot. Several sessions ago, I had a young lady approach me that was raped, and the guy later confessed, and so she had a deal where they couldn't prosecute this guy because the statute of limitations had expired. So I began working on a lot of these problems with sexual assault and domestic battery and all those kind of things. And so I'll have a bill that tries to get some funding for the state police and local units that investigate child pornography crimes. Guys like Jared Fogle, who had terabytes of this horrible child pornography. These units, you guys are engaged in a little bit of technology, but these units are seizing terabytes of data, and they don't have enough resources essentially to get the job done. And so I'm trying to get the state police a couple $1 million, and they could keep $1 million for that purpose, and then use $1 million to distribute out to local sheriff's departments and city police departments that work in this same area. At the same time, I'll have a bill looking at statute of limitations on child sex crimes, and really we're trying to address these situations where the kid maybe it's an incest situation or a relative, and they don't say anything at the time, and later they realize that what happened to him was completely out of line, and so in most situations, statute of limitations is 2 to 5 years. It's pretty small, and so we're looking at that. That's something the prosecutors brought to me, and one of the prosecutors told me about a mother who had a daughter who said her stepdad was molesting her as a child, and she didn't believe the girl, and later divorced this guy. And as she's cleaning out his stuff, she finds a videotape that he made of actually doing it, and the statute of limitations had expired. And so these are kind of tough conversations. They're not fun to engage in, but they're really necessary because I've come to the conclusion that a lot of the the young people that end up abusing drugs and alcohol are victims at some level.
Yeah, it's a recurring story.
Yeah. And so I'm also working on the unprocessed sexual assault kits. Last year I had a bill that asked the state police to do a study.
We saw the story, I guess probably the results of that there was just an obscene number that were not processed.
Right. And so
in the thousands.
We didn't know how many might exist. I actually was kind of pleasantly surprised it was 5,200 and not 15,000 like I had heard might exist.
Right.
And then of those 5,200, about 2,600 of them, there's no reason why they weren't processed. And so how can we get we had a bill last year that dealt with collection of DNA upon felony arrest. And what we know anecdotally from other states is as we collect data and enter it into the system, the more data we enter, of course, the more matches occur. And in these sexual assault kits, the match rate is almost 50%. And so we're trying to figure out a way to do two things. How do we address the number that's 2,600 that haven't been processed, and how do we continue that conversation with the law enforcement agency that's holding them as to whether they're appropriate for submission? There are what are called Jane Doe kits where the victim can say at the time of the collection, look, I'm not sure about this, whether I want to participate in prosecution, and law enforcement is supposed to hold that kit for up to a year. And then they're supposed to be destroyed. I don't know, whether law enforcement officers have said, I think this is going to match at some point, so I'm just going to hold on to it, and whether that's contributed to that number or not. So we're kind of having those follow-up conversations, and this not being a budget session, I'm in a tough spot because I can't ask for money to address that backlog or that unprocessed number. And so we're looking for grant money through the Department of Justice to try to address that pool of kits. But what I don't want to have happen is, as we go forward, any more kits to move into that number.
Right.
So you did touch on a second ago the DNA collection.
Right.
And I know some people within my circle have had concerns with that.
It's the collection whenever you're charged.
It's not based on conviction, right?
Right.
And then it's the trust but verify that is it actually going to get thrown out, or is your information going to be in the system?
I think we're going to have to kind of watch that and make sure that there are appropriate safeguards, because I don't want somebody that's innocent to be charged.
Right.
I think what I do know about DNA is it at a high rate also eliminates people from being suspects, and so it's like the modern day fingerprint,
right.
And so that kind of has pushed this urgency to try to get these folks that are in fact sexually assaulted. They go to an emergency room. They have the kit collected. Can we make sure that we get those processed? And so my bill this year tries to look at, okay, going back next year, what number would we ask for a tracking system? I think we need some type of barcode tracking system. As a police detective pulls that kit at the hospital and it's used to collect the DNA or the sample, scan that barcode into the system. We can tell you in the future exactly where that kit is, what step in the process that it's in, and the victims should have then the ability to know what's happening with their case. And
that sounds like a great idea.
And so I guess my thing in most of the work that I've tried to do over the years is, how do we make the process work more effectively for the person that's impacted by that particular discussion?
Absolutely.
And I think, a couple of these bills we talked about are just two of those things. Hopefully we can make some progress on.
Your process improvements.
Right.
So going back to an earlier comment, we got a comment from Mike Broyles here in Henry County, and he's wondering about the instead of doing a tax credit for the farm ground, for the area that's not being used, he's wondering about maybe the state just purchasing that ground or the county's purchasing that ground. But I guess this would only apply in the cases when you have corn in place. You wouldn't have that credit in a year where you had grain or not grain, beans or wheat or a hayfield.
Right. And I think that's the situation that we don't want to get in, where the state then becomes an owner of all this ground.
Well, and it becomes more ground for the state to maintain.
Right. And so
you have to hire more people on the state's payroll to clear out the areas. And
as you get saplings coming up, somebody's got to go out and cut those down. And so it becomes a maintenance situation. It seems like that this proposal really is a very basic common sense type proposal, and I'm hopeful. I think it likely will see changes as it moves through the process, and hopefully it'll do that this year. But I'm filing bills. I filed bills last year. I got 2 bills passed that I filed 4 times in a row, and I think that's the other thing I wanted to say about being a legislator. I think people think that you come up with this idea and you file the bill and it just passes through the system and it's done. And that's really not the way it works. It's complicated, and I think for good reason it's complicated. That friction, that back and forth discussion that takes place as the bill moves through committees and through the different chambers is really valuable in making sure that we create the best product that we possibly can at the end of the day. And what's signed into law by the governor is something that we don't immediately have to come back and fix. And we've seen some of those things.
I was going to say, that was probably the first thing we wanted to talk about is the CBD oil,
right?
Which I think passed unanimously last year.
Right.
But we've seen, I guess the Attorney General has a different view. Right. And you coming from the law enforcement background, I'm sure you have some insight into it as well. There was like a 60-day period, so that basically the governor gave an enforcement bridge to you guys. So you've got, I guess if your group takes action right now, they don't have to pull it off the shelves. Is that something you're up to speed on yet?
Yeah, I think that's it's a really complicated thing, and unfortunately, the Attorney General is right by the law. The strict
according
interpretation
to the interpretation of the law, he is correct. It's just correct. Whether the law is just or not.
So I guess I voted in favor of the CBD oil. I've got a couple families in my district that have children with intractable epilepsy who, they literally go through numerous bicycle helmets a week as the child has seizures, and CBD oil works.
Yep.
And so the question is, however this discussion moves forward, can we create a process that makes sense? That's I come from the enforcement side. I want something that's easy for law enforcement to enforce. And for me, the key piece is labeling. We got all kinds of different systems for different products that are ingested by people that are labeled. And eventually we're going to be growing hemp in Indiana, and a lot of farmers are going to be growing it.
It's a very big thing in Kentucky already.
It's a valuable commodity. They use the hemp fibers to make dashes for Cadillacs, and there's all kinds of things. It's interesting because as this discussion has moved, I'm one of the few legislators that sat on both Health Committee, where we had the discussions around hemp, and also Agriculture Committee, where we had discussions around hemp. And so, I think we've got to continue to move this. But for me, I think there's a way that Kade's farm grows this product, processes it, and it's labeled as having come from his farm, and it's certified as having less than 0.03% THC by volume, and and that's the way it's enforceable.
And I guess my concern, I'm always going to come down on the side of more freedom or trying to make things as simple as possible. So right now we've got a small baby step where it's epilepsy only, and it is it's only approved for people that go get licensed through the state. Right. And you have to go through a number of hoops to get there.
Right.
Why control this? Why control it at all?
Yeah, and I think that's the other piece of the discussion is as we move through this, Indiana's. We're still arguing about Sunday sales.
That's on the list.
I mean, we're not a state that's going to move out in front of the recreational use of marijuana. And frankly, I am against that. I understand there are some legitimate medical use concerns. And so how do we have this discussion in a way that it doesn't open up like Pandora's box and create all these situations that we're seeing in some other states? I've been in seminars with legislators who created the laws in state of Washington and Colorado, and they said, without question, we've created a lot of tax revenue, but we've created this whole area of ancillary problems that are really difficult. And, just today on the way over here, I was listening to the news, and Attorney General Sessions was saying he's going to roll back some of the, allowances that Obama had put in place.
The Obama allowances.
And so as long as that friction's taking place between the state and the federal level, I think it's going to be a tough decision.
Yeah, that definitely makes it a tougher decision.
Right.
And there used to be a show on, I believe it was A&E, that was covering the largest medical marijuana dispensary in the world, which was in California, and the owner, and he ended up being taken. He sued the federal government because all of his assets were seized from the shop after the show started. But it was from the DEA, even though California had had written into their bill that was legalizing medical marijuana that a federal and local law enforcement agencies couldn't collaborate, which is also in House Bill 1106 that was put up by Jim Lucas, but it didn't matter in that situation. So I think you're right whenever you're talking about friction between the federal government and the states. But I think that, typically Republicans are for states' rights.
Sure.
And I think that is something that Attorney General Sessions has really dropped the ball on.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what went into his decision. And I wouldn't want to speculate on that. I just think that if we're going to have a system in place in Indiana where we have endorsed a particular process, it needs to be as user-friendly as it possibly can be. And, my son's a state excise officer, and was involved in some of this discussion around whether CBD oil, even without any detectable THC, was a look-alike drug or some other definition. And so I would tell you that having been somebody that made policy and made administrative rule through the DNR, that the lawyers that are involved in that discussion can make it a really complicated discussion, and the state agencies that are left with trying to determine how to navigate that sometimes have a pretty big challenge.
In my experience with lawyers, they tend to make things very complicated.
Well, it's the way they stay employed.
Yeah,
that's why I always come down on the side of simplicity and freedom.
Right. Yeah. Simplicity is obviously a good thing.
Yep. Well, very good. So they did have a big rally yesterday too, as well. Yeah. So, do you expect that bill to come out of the House, or do you have a feel for whether or not that's going to come through to your side?
I expect it to become some type of study.
Yeah.
And I would say that my gut feeling is whether it passes the House or not, it would be dead when it got to the Senate.
Yeah.
27 states so far have it. And I think, we're at 4 or 5 recreational, but I think it's 27 states for medicinal.
Honestly, as I sit here, I really have a hard time with a state that's involved in an opiate crisis, just kind of opening the door up. And
I think that's one of the main reasons that advocates for medical marijuana want it, is because of the opioid crisis.
Yeah, and I believe some of those statistics where it is.
It's just so hard to tell.
It's
not a black and white issue.
Sure. And I think those are the ones that are the most complicated to try to get people through. So like I said earlier, if your bill, you want it to be simple.
Right.
And you don't want all these outside influences in. And really the cold beer and the cold beer discussion has really been driven by two different parties, both of which are going to benefit in different ways.
Neither one of those parties is a consumer.
Right. and so the consumers left because of
we don't have a lobbying group.
Right. Because of the conflict, they're left with, okay, I have to figure this out. And so, I think we try to do the best we can, but we will likely see pretty substantial movement on that issue this session. And, the other parts of this, I think, as other states and as the federal government makes some moves, we'll see, Indiana kind of trying to be, but we're probably going to be more cautious than most states have been.
Do you have a position yet yourself? Are you a cold beer 6-day-a-week guy or a warm beer 7-day-a-week guy?
I honestly don't care.
Yeah.
I think most of my constituents say that it's a legal, highly regulated product, and they should be able to get it however and whenever they want to get it. Yep. And frankly, when you create all these allowances, if you're a micro brew or a micro winery and you can do this and do that and you can't do it over here.
Yeah, then what's the point in even...
You take away any legitimate arguments about any restriction then.
Yeah, you're the old argument of morality is totally gone.
Well, I mean, so I deal a lot with mental health challenges, and there's a huge difference in bad habits and addiction. And so, can we figure out ways in which we don't contribute to the addicted, the really negative use of some of these products, and leave all the rest of the people out of the discussion to the extent possible? And that's kind of a tightrope to watch.
When Rex was running for governor last cycle, it was we talked about there was a difference between bad habits, crimes, and vices. Right. And I appreciate you mentioning that, because it's well, it may be a bad habit. It's not necessarily something that should be criminal or
So I one of the things we haven't talked about yet is so I was going to retire at age 51, and my wife says, "You're not sitting at home at age 51." Well, I go to work, and so I took a job.
Watch me.
I took a job running the security department and the disaster management programs at Hancock Regional Hospital, and what that did was it put me in the ER, where I dealt face-to-face with addicts and people who had PTSD from military issues and mental health challenges of all shapes and sizes and things. And so if you look at my work over the last 6 years, you'll see a heavy focus on mental health, and how do we figure out ways to get that person and that person's family a better outcome, because they become the most difficult people to deal with. They don't fit well with society norms, and so that's why I came to the conclusion that probably you guys know of people, even with the use of alcohol, where that one person who can drink a beer or two or something, but if he goes over that, he becomes just an idiot. Yep. And he's a person that has alcoholic tendencies.
Oh, then Kade drank that one, and it's making me nervous.
Yeah.
Over here.
And so, but by the same token, you probably know guys that can do just fine as long as they stay on beer. But if they go to hard liquor, then they become a guy that's fighting and a problem.
Absolutely.
And so, all of us have various challenges. All of us, including myself, and how do we try to figure out ways to help the people that need help, but really not hurt the people that don't need impacted in. And so one of the things I'm working on this session, that we were talking about bills, and hopefully we can continue to talk about bills.
Yep.
So I was meeting at Fayette Regional Hospital, and we're talking about the challenge of people who become addicted from the medical community. And, nurses and respiratory therapists and even anesthesiologists and people like that have access to drugs, and sometimes they become addicted. And so as a state, we've tried to look at these inpatient intensive treatment programs where there are a lot of wraparound services and then follow-up counseling for a period of time. Usually it's 6 months with a in-residence portion and then some follow-up process. And in that discussion we were having there, the CEO of the hospital said, the most valuable person for me to use in my treatment program is somebody who has a shared life experience, somebody that's come out of addiction, is now doing better and moving to a better place in their life. And the challenge they have is it's difficult for them to get their felony record expunged.
Absolutely.
And because of that, they have to wait 7 or 8 years in order to become relicensed again to be a nurse or whatever they were. And so I wrote a bill this year that says, if you have come out of one of those programs, participated successfully, the program signs off on it, the local prosecutor and the local judge signs off on it, then you're eligible for immediate expungement, and then you can become relicensed. And hopefully, instead of not being able to find a good job and struggling, you'll be back as a productive member of society more quickly, and hopefully that valuable link that helps those people who are going through that treatment program again. Again, that's one of those examples, I think, of trying to be thoughtful as a legislator to say, how do we tweak the systems that we have to make them work more effectively? And if the discussion is that we're not comfortable with the person that comes out of this 6-month program, then fix the 6-month program,
right?
So that we are comfortable.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, I guess those are just a few examples. Of course, I get a lot of the agency bills. I've got a bill, state police bill. It's a cleanup bill. This may or may not be controversial. One of the pieces of it is that you'll have to carry that little card that you get from your insurance company that says you do have insurance.
Oh, yeah. Because
too often the person gets insurance and cancels it, and then they hit you, and they're uninsured motorists.
Right.
And so
that's very common in other states too.
Right. And so it's just trying to keep us up to speed with some of the other states, and that that may or may not be something that people don't like, but that's just one component of that whole discussion of the state police agency bill.
You're wanting them to have to carry the card on their person instead of showing, and
instead of just having the number on their registration, which the B&B will just carry over from year to year.
They'll just take any number.
Doesn't mean that you have insurance. And so, again, the bad actors are the ones that are hurting I had a son that was hit by an uninsured motorist, and it actually just helped our insurance rates go up because my insurance company paid for it instead of the other guy.
Of course, you could still have the guy that goes out and buys a policy and then cancels in 30 days and still has a piece of paper that looks like it's valid for another 11 months.
Still has a card, right?
Yeah. But he's got to do that.
But most people aren't going to do that, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Going back to just a real world, I had a conversation with a fellow today who went through he had possession of something because he was hooked at one time, and he's been good for 15 years, 10 years. But the felony's still on the record, and you have real employment concerns.
Sure.
And it's I definitely think that I'm very much applauding what you're doing there. But just anybody that's had a simple possession or a nonviolent crime, and you've got a felony that's on your record, there's still a big burden and administrative hassle for somebody to get that off of their record, and often they don't have the job or the resources to go through and to get that removed.
You also can't own a firearm.
Yeah, and you can't own a firearm.
Yeah, well, it's certainly I wouldn't be willing to do that for violent felons.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think there's another segment of society that look, they made some bad choices, and unfortunately, you don't know. I know of one situation where the guy used a particular drug for years, and then it quit giving him the high, so he started to mix fentanyl with it. Well, fentanyl was the drug that got him really addicted.
Yeah.
And we've got carfentanil now, which is like 10,000 times as strong as regular fentanyl, and officers are getting some powder on their uniform and flicking it off and becoming overdosed.
Yeah,
and
there was an officer in Ohio that overdosed and died because he had accidentally flicked some off of his uniform, and just that little bit of skin contact.
So it's kind of a dangerous world. And we had this interesting discussion around needle exchanges during the last session. I was probably the one that argued the most passionately for letting local units decide for themselves what works. Yeah. Because my point at the microphone was I interacted with addicts daily at the hospital. When I put my hands on a person to control them, I never worried about catching an addiction. I always worried about catching hepatitis or HIV.
Yep.
And the needle exchange program is completely designed to stop the spread of disease.
Right.
And so, you have all these other discussions about, are we feeding the addiction? We're doing all these things. Well, perhaps.
But you also look at some of the Northern European countries that, they said, hey, we have a heroin problem. They admitted it, and they gave heroin to people, and they reduced their addiction by 50%.
So I think that's
because they get into a clean environment.
That's the thing. How can we be thoughtful in these discussions instead of just saying, look, this is a bright line, and I'm not going near that line. And so I think that's probably the thing that I've tried to do during my 6 years there is be a person that stands up, and when you say something, it's not some off the wall comment. It's it's thoughtful, and we're really trying to move policies that make sense and really, if they're applied properly, have a good benefit for the public that we serve.
So one more hot topic issue that I think is going to be coming through. I have this little pink card that I had to pay the state to carry so that I can have my lifetime handgun permit. Right. There's a bill that's trying to eliminate that.
Right.
Is that something that you think has life, where we don't have to license our rights anymore, or where's that one going?
I don't know. I grew up with a gun in my hand from the time I was 9 years old. I was hunting by myself. And, I'm of the opinion that a firearm's just a tool, just like a hammer is a tool. And
I don't have to pay the state $135 to have a hammer.
So the
hammer isn't mentioned in the Constitution either.
Yeah. So I'm a Second Amendment guy, and I think that, we can, I don't have a problem with what Jim Lucas is trying to do and some other folks, but I would tell you that there's a huge amount of resistance out there.
Yep.
For that particular topic, and I'm not trying to dog him at all, but he is a guy that does not shy away from a fight, and so he helps build the opposition. In some cases, I wish he would.
It's a different approach,
just kind of like the president tweeting all the time. I wish that wouldn't happen.
I'm probably not as well versed as I should be on that, but the only issue I could probably see in that would be reciprocity. Right. Could you shed any light on what would happen if that were to pass?
And so I can give you kind of an example, and why I'm just a little bit concerned about it.
Okay.
And so Illinois doesn't have a hang-up permit; they have a federal firearms license, or FFL. And so when somebody wanted to come to Indiana to hunt, we required a handgun permit because they couldn't have a handgun permit. They couldn't use their handgun here legally. Mm-hmm. Now, we as officers would say,
"You're doing the best you can."
Yeah, you're doing the best you can. Have fun, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not. I'm just saying that all law enforcement agencies don't have the same philosophy, and all states don't have the same philosophy, and so. I really was hopeful when I started hearing this discussion being had in Congress that we would see some movement on the federal level that, so long as you're licensed in one state, you're recognized in any state in the country.
Just like a driver's license does.
And,
but my permit's not good in Ohio. I can't carry in Ohio.
Right.
or Illinois.
And and there are all these kind of I call them lawyer tactics. You can get a Utah permit, or you can get some other permit that's recognized in other states that Indiana might not be. And so there are all these methods around the madness kind of thing. Most people want to be legal. Tell us how to be legal.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think we as government have an obligation to make that clear and easy to understand as much as possible. And I think we failed in this particular discussion.
Well, I'm glad we're having it. I think it's an important one to have, and I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know where we're going to end up. If it's going to be, I don't know. Are we going to have to pass a class? Maybe the happy medium is you pass a class and you show that you've passed the class, and then you don't have to be licensed.
So I mentioned earlier that I was administrator of our education program. In the early 70s, we were seeing about 30 hunting accidents a year, the type of hunting accidents where somebody shoots and covers somebody else and they're sprayed with shot or whatever. And we started in 74, we started the Indiana Hunter Education Program, which is 10-hour, it's just basic farm.
I passed it in 1999.
But I would tell you that what we saw over the years was our hunting accident numbers went way down. Mm-hmm. And today, there are just a few annually, and most of the problem we have is people falling out of tree stands, right? They don't wear a harness in their tree stand. And so I'm a believer in education being, and frankly, if that were the compromise that took away the opposition, I would say, I think most people would agree that it's okay.
There's nothing wrong with. I would much rather pay to be educated than pay for a card.
Right, like an NRA program or a hunter education card is showing that you understand the basics of the functioning of the firearm. But just to give you an example of accidents I've heard of is as people drop the magazine and forget that there's one in the tube, and they are messing around with it, and of course it discharges, and they're like, how did that happen? I unloaded it, kind of thing. And so that's one of those things that if you don't have a mentor, a father figure, or somebody else that introduced you to firearm, it's hugely beneficial to understand just the basic functioning of that particular firearm.
Yeah.
And so, I'm one of those guys that just says, let's figure this out. Let's take away the arguments to the extent possible. But at the end of the day, I've got to have 26 votes in the Senate, and I've got to have 51 votes in the House. And then I've got to have a governor that agrees that he's going to sign that particular piece of legislation. And so hopefully we'll keep the discussion moving, and it'll be done in a thoughtful way. And, I'll weigh in to the extent I can. I tried to do that. We passed a rifle bill for deer hunting a couple sessions ago. It's just an absolutely messed up bill. I didn't vote for it because it left out guns like 270s and lots of really good rounds, and included a 300 Win Mag that you could kill an elephant with. And so
is this the one that messed up pistol hunting? Or
right,
last.
And so I'm saying, you guys really messed it up. I should have stood up at the microphone and killed it. I have the ability to do that probably as the ex-DNR guy.
Yeah.
But I at the same time, I didn't think there was anything wrong with using rifles to deer hunt with. And so, I'm one of those guys that says, okay, in our state law, we've got a minimum requirement to kill a deer. And right now, it's 2 sticks of string and a sharp rock, because you can use a flint napped primitive longbow to kill a deer. And so that's the minimum expectation. How do we set a maximum expectation and then try to be reasonable with everything? Say, if it's less than here, it's not okay. If it's over here, it's not okay. Yeah. And so everything else kind of falls in the middle. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of discussions I like to have.
And it's always an interesting balancing act between whether or not it needs to be an administrative rule or if it needs to be you guys deciding calibers in the state house.
I would tell you this, that most legislators have no business deciding what the hunting rules are.
Yeah.
I'm probably the exception, and not trying to say big-headed, but I spent 30 years of my life out regulating hunting activities, and that when we first started this discussion at DNR with pistol calibers, rifles, I said, look, this is going to become a confusing discussion unless we say you can use this, and this, and try to have a logical argument as to why we allow this. They have a lethal ballistic range of 150 yards or something, and we'll say, oh, that's the standard.
Yeah,
right.
And then everything else that's created and comes along that fits within that, we'll say it's okay. But what we did was we created a situation where guys would go out and wildcat and create a 358 Hoosier, which has the same ballistic range as a 30-06, and they figured out a way to get around our system using the law that we wrote against us. And so, I mean, we just have to be smarter than that.
And then technology also caught up. There's also smokeless muzzleloaders, that have all kinds of range. Just standard black powder muzzleloaders nowadays.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Inside 300 yards, you can, if you're a good shot, you can hit something.
Good shot.
Mike, Brent Spicer has pointed out that Mike's sign is taking a tumble. If you're watching the live stream, it's half down. We have to repair it. Need an emergency repair for him.
Jared, quick correction. I think Ohio does recognize Indiana's permit.
They do.
License to carry now.
I think Ohio does. Illinois does.
They are duty to inform. So if you do get pulled over or have any interaction, you need to let them know as soon as you get pulled over.
Okay. That should be common knowledge if you're carrying a firearm.
It should be anywhere, yeah.
And honestly, I think, as a law enforcement officer, all I wanted to know was I've got a handgun. It's in my console. And I would say that most conservation officers are probably too relaxed around firearms because you just are around them all the time.
There's an expectation you have.
Even guys out fishing are going to have a handgun in their tackle box a lot of times.
Yep.
And so
northern pike are dangerous, okay?
They can be. They've got some teeth on them.
Yeah.
Right.
So, well, Mike, I appreciate you coming. This is kind of the part of the show where we get to final thoughts. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or we didn't cover today?
No, it's been great to share some ideas and thoughts with you guys. I think I'm an example of just what you see in the Indiana legislature. Most of us aren't career politicians. Most folks, there are a few folks who are kind of what I call legacy guys whose dads were involved and whatever. But I think the one thing that I try to tell groups is if Mike Crider is a state senator, anybody can be, because I grew up in small town Shirley, went to school at Eastern Hancock. I didn't go to college. Now I've had a lifelong learning discipline in my life where I always tried to expand my capabilities. But, the reason I ended up in politics was because I was successful at something else. And people recognized I had the ability, the people skills, the other things that might be transferable skills to this process. And it's really fun. It's a satisfying thing to take some of the issues that we've talked about and take them from concept to signed into law, to have somebody call me and say, your Jennings law that dealt with statute of limitations for rape, that there was a guy caught on a stalking charge in Boone County, and when they entered his DNA, it matched a sexual assault that was 25 years old. And this lady now has justice. She has closure in her situation because of something that you had a part in implementing. And I think that's really what most of us are there trying to do. There are people from the schools of thought that say there are way too many laws in the books. For every law you pass, you ought to take a law away. But I think what we do most of the time is we tweak the laws that exist and we try to make them work better.
Right.
Give us a better outcome. And it's really a satisfying thing.
We always say the legitimate role of government is to protect us from force and fraud. And when you're working on those things, I think we're going to find a lot of common ground.
Sure.
How do people follow you if they want to get in contact? If they want to, I know you're going to have a campaign coming up. I'd imagine in about a year again for your seat.
I was reelected in 16, so I'm good until 20.
2 years, yeah. Okay.
I've got, and so I spend a lot of time on Facebook. You can see I'm not shy about sharing my opinion on Facebook. And, they can contact me through my office in Indianapolis. The one thing I tell folks is don't, if you make a contact with your legislator and you don't feel like you're getting a result, don't be afraid to reach out to me. I'm a guy that's not opposed. I feel like most of the things I work on have a statewide impact. I don't work on just very regional things most of the time. And so if you have a concern that you feel like I can be helpful with, let me know.
Very good. Kate, any final thoughts tonight?
Happy New Year, everybody. It's good to be back. I appreciate you guys inviting me on to be another co-host, and looking forward to the rest of this year.
Oh, very good. I'm glad you wore the flannel. We all broke out our flannel today. Even Mike's got it on in his undershirt there. We'll take a picture to post with the podcast after the show's over. Dakota, anything for us?
Final thoughts. Mark Koger was elected as the City of Newcastle's City Council president again, and he is my representative. So, well, hometown pride, home area pride. But
Ward 3 represent, right? Or whatever you are.
Ward 5, actually. Ward 5. But yeah, I like Mark. He's a really good guy. So congratulations to him. He's also a listener. And then some more Newcastle news. They've torn down the bathrooms at Baker Park and they are going to build bathrooms on trailers, and so that they can take them out of the park every night and clean them out and keep them from being vandalized.
We just can't have nice things, can we? We have to.
Nope. They've been vandalized so bad, so they're tearing down all the bathrooms and building them on trailers. We'll see how that goes and how the people who enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act feel about that. So just a little update for Newcastle, because I've been following that and try to give an update there.
Oh, very cool. Atokad Savad on the Twitter.
Yep.
All
it's
right.
Dakota Davis spelled backwards.
There you go. I'm looking forward to this weekend. Next week we've got I think it's just going to be four of us, or have to be a little bit more of a fun episode. I don't think we have a political guest, so it'll be a little bit more laid back, and we'll talk about the news of the week, and going to Chicago with the Davises, my fiance,
tomorrow,
the lovely Sarah Potter, and the Davises. So we'll see. I'm going to go see Second City and check out a show up there, which is something I've always wanted to do. So that's going to be fun.
You definitely can't carry there.
No, I'll leave it at home.
That's unfortunate. No, that's one place I want to carry.
Unless you're a criminal.
You want to carry in Chicago, but there's no way you can.
No, we'll leave them at home and try to stay on the paved roads. So appreciate everybody following. The way we grow is your likes and subscriptions, so do what you can there. You can catch our replays on Indiana Talks on Saturdays on their web show. Of course, always available on TuneIn Radio and your podcast feeds, plus the YouTube. We'll see y'all next week.
Thank you for listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Get our other shows at WeareLibertarians.com.